Hello. I nearly hit the wrong button then. Sorry. Anyway, welcome. Hello. It is Tuesday again. Yeah. Oh, couple of things. Announcements. Yeah. Sorry, Alan. Alan being down in Australia or up in Australia, depending on the way that you look at it. Yeah. UK clocks have gone back by an hour. Sorry. I think that makes it like 3 or 4 a.m. wherever you are. But on the positive, for other people on the other side of the world, you've all gained an hour. You've got an extra hour, I guess, in bed. Only for a week though, because then things change again. So anyway, welcome. We are now going to spend the next hour together, as always, in that program, Capture One. Capture One being the raw processor written by the guys out in Copenhagen in Denmark that allows us to take what we captured with our camera on a sensor, so the raw data that came through the lens, all that light that's out there, stores it onto our memory card, and we take that data, put it into a raw processor, and it means that we can edit images based on basically based on the maximum amount of data that was possibly there, but to get it back to what we remember and what we saw. And that's different to if you store in your camera a JPEG or any form of flat file, because you're limiting the amount of data that the camera has recorded. You're limiting the amount of scope you've got to recover detail, shadows, highlights, and all that sort of stuff. So it's one of the reasons why most pro photographers will shoot in RAW, and it's one of the reasons that RAW processors exist. And this is the one that we're going to spend the next hour working through. So for those of you that are very familiar, please use the opportunity to heckle, comment, disagree, agree, whatever you want, request in the chat that you are hopefully, most of you are already in. Well done, those of you that found it. For those of you that haven't, it's somewhere on your screen, probably there somewhere or there, either way. But for those of you that are watching in the future, you're not able to interact. That's sad, isn't it? You should be more like Steve, who's now making an effort to arrive live, because that's a lot more fun. Anyway, if you are watching it in the future, you can still put comments in, and we'll still try and answer any questions. It's just going to be a little while, and we obviously can't affect what we're actually changing or talking about in the session. So we've got your images that you've sent in over the last couple of weeks. We've got a lot of things to play with today. We're also on a new version of the beta, which we will be using today. And a few other things as well. So let's get started. First off, it's the end of October. I know it's not the end of October, but if you are a member of that Facebook group up there, which you can search for, you will know that there is a monthly competition amongst you guys. And I have a look at your wonderful pictures, and we pick out the runners-up and the winners every single month. Hence a monthly competition, obviously. So for those of you that are waiting with bated breath, we're actually pulling it forward this month. Don't enter anymore. Don't go on there, because we've already decided. So here's your runners-up for October. Well done, Mike. Well done, Georg. Well done, David. Theme this month was East. So just to sort of run through, describe. First one on the left, Mike's shot of Sakura in Japan. If you go to Japan during cherry blossom season, you will see millions and millions and millions of people trying to take pictures of not many millions of cherry blossoms. Don't get me wrong, it looks incredible, but wow, there's a lot of people there. So yes, it's celebrated. Yes, it's fantastic. Yes, it's very much East. Yes, it's very much iconic Japan. But for those of you with a photographer hat on, sometimes maybe the popular times aren't the best times to go and visit a place, because you will see more people than you will cherry blossoms. What are they called? Petals? Yeah, I guess. Anyway, there you go. Next up is Georg's shot of Battersea Power Station, which is now not a power station. It's now a huge, great big mall and corporate offices for Apple and all the other stuff that goes on in there, with a plane heading to Heathrow, which is definitely travelling east. I'm not. So there's lots of things that we can play with architectural photos, and we can talk about uprights, and we can talk about all the other stuff that goes with it. But actually, I quite like a dynamic version of that shot. And I think things like Battersea Power Station, unless you're going to be way, way back and shoot it head on and get every single vertical straight, you're better off doing something dynamic that gives you a bit of an air of height. Final one, only because I was in Japan a couple of weeks ago, and this rings true. So actually, David, well done. David actually made the point. It's not the best technical image, but I quite like capturing some realities. And one of the realities in Japan is whoever that guy is, just like me, is too big for that country. And the country is not designed for us. So yeah, well done, you three runners up. Congratulations-ish. I say congratulations. You didn't win, but you do get featured, so well done. Yay. The person that won, however, is Tony. Well done, Tony. Tony gets one of those, a Grophy. This being David Grover from Capture One. You will all celebrate David Grover in a couple of days' time when he's back on your televisual screens, live viewing. But yes, well done, Tony. Let me get rid of David. He's blocking the view. East, very much. Actually, it turns out East Yorkshire. So, for those of you that are hunting Durdle Door, turns out, and it's weird. It's weird how this happened. So, in the last, I think, probably 2 months, I must have seen 10 different images of this same area of East Yorkshire. And it looks stunning. Don't get me wrong. It's, you know, actually for all of the crowds that now hit Durdle Door, actually this looks quite peaceful and serene, unless you photoshopped out 100,000 people, Tony. But well done. It's a nice view. B, it's very well executed. C, the only thing I would have liked, if I'm being picky, it's a bit more of a starburst out of that. I get that it's diffused cloud, but yeah, maybe stopping down a little bit. I don't know what that was shot at. If it was f11, maybe try 16 just to see if you can get it to burst a little bit more, because it's beautiful. It's a beautiful shot. I might actually have to head up there. I think we should all head up there. Yeah, let's turn it into one of those honeypot locations where it's overcrowded. Let's do that. Let's do a social media ruining. No, don't. Anyway, well done, Tony. Yes, well deserved. Lovely landscape, well executed. And it's east. It's pointing east. It is in the east. It's in East Yorkshire. Well done. Which also means it was sunrise, which means there's less people. True story. Less people at sunrise and sunset if ever you want to shoot somewhere. So let's get into some other stuff. Firstly, if you want to upgrade or upload your files, that's where to do it. So you go to WeTransfer Live. Sorry. Oh my God, what's going on? portreeforlife.wetransfer.com. You will need to upload your name, also put that in the notes, put in what the issue or what you're looking for out of that file, and also upload the raw file or the raw file with adjustments out of Capture One, which I'll show you in a second as an EIP. That allows us to then download it, have a look. For your reference, we haven't sort of talked about this before for a long time now. I don't pre-edit the images that you send in. So literally we'll load them in, and what you're seeing when we're editing them on the screen is actually me and my genuine thought process in terms of what I'm seeing for the first time there, what I would do to edit it, and hopefully what I'd do to try and fix the issue if you've raised any. So there you go. Get those files uploaded. If you have spare time next month as well, and you want to do some fun things, this is exciting. BIPP, British Institute of Professional Photography. I'm on the board for the BIPP, and on the 21st of November is the Big Bash. What is that? Well, it's the International Awards. So some of you on here I know have entered. So it's the International Printmasters competition, which is awards for the best in different genres. Well done, those of you that win. Congratulations, those of you that get little trophies. Try again next time for those of you that don't. But either way, the awards are being done that night. But also there are talks, there are demos, there are live interactive sessions. We've got Jonathan Knowles, who's one of the best advertising photographers in the world, genuinely doing some interactive sessions with people. We've got David Grover's going to be there. He's going to be there with Candy, trying to convince her to switch to Capture One Live. Nothing could go wrong there, right? What else have we got? So people that are there. You got Fuji there. You got Graphic Studio there. You have Capture One there, as I said. Gavin's there to talk retouching. There's loads of stuff going on. But for those of you that want to go, it's in Holborn Studios, 21st November. It's a whole afternoon and food and drinks. There you go. See, first to hear it here, right? But it should be a good thing, and it's open to non-members. You don't have to be a BIPP member to go. And Holborn Studios is a really cool place. You should actually, if you haven't been there, you should go and have a look anyway. There you go. So imagine it's like a property tour with some photography stuff and some free drinks. Yay. If you don't want to do that and you want to sit at home revising, remember we've got that latest masterclass, which is on architecture and perspective. Funnily enough, talking about the Battersea Power Station thing, there are some challenges with how we shoot architectural images. That's all covered in there. You'll find the link for that in the description as well. Whew. Right. All that out of the way. Let's talk about version. Anyone spot the new splash screen? So we are on Capture One Beta 4 for 16.7. As a reminder, I covered this last week. So for those of you that want to look at what the new feature, the main new features are in the beta and 16.7, watch last week's, because last week we go through it in depth. We're not going to do that today. We're just going to use the program as if it were real and production and ready to go. Do not use this as your production system. This is a little sandbox system that doesn't matter if I delete it. For those of you that genuinely use Capture One for commercial or production reasons, or it's your library of all of the images that you've ever edited, please do not risk using Capture One as a beta version on your live content. Same applies for any software, but specifically with this, especially if it's catalogs, because you're upgrading into a road that may not continue if you try and do that. So please, please do it in a test bed. Do it carefully. And yeah, let's be sensible with things like that. But for those of you that are on a version 16.6 or prior, remember this is a major version upgrade. So when it happens, who knows when it will happen, but it might be a coincidence that the beta runs out on the 30th of October, and it might be a coincidence that David's doing a session on the 30th of October. You know, if I was guessing of dates that are serendipitous. Anyway, either way, tune in on Thursday. Look at David's introduction to Capture One and the new features on there. But for those of you that are on a previous version, if you subscribe, you are entitled to upgrade to it immediately. It's part of your subscription. It's not free. You're paying for it. So please, get ready to go with it. Again, if you're on production, remember this is a 0.0 version. If you're waiting for bugs to be fixed, while some are being fixed in the beta, not all will be. So you may choose to, back away just by one version or whatever. If you're on a perpetual license, this is not included in your license. You will need to upgrade, and that's your choice whether or not you see the features as worth it. But ultimately, all your decision. For those of you that are on a monthly subscription, you do not have to move forward. You can stay where you are. For those of you that are on a perpetual license or any other sort of setup, maybe potentially a what do they call them? Oh, the mass licenses, the big ones, the corporate licenses. You may have to talk and look at what the upgrade options are, because this is changing the version. It's a major release, so it goes to 16.7 rather than 0.6, not the little points. And that means, unfortunately, the perpetual licenses are not entitled to move forward. Right. Couple questions then on this stuff. A couple of observations, in fact. So George has actually said, well done, you felt useful today. It's great. But one bug I reported has been corrected in the last beta. Yes, it has. Some of the bugs that have been reported, I know, have been covered. Where was the other? Oh, Paula, Thursday's a white smoke day. Don't give David delusions of grandeur. And Tim said, did the new beta improve upon the issues I highlighted last week with the contact sheets? No, it did not, is the short answer. There are a few things that I think are still lacking in 16.7. Let's hope they get improved and hope they get moved forward. In terms of things that are definitely there in 16.7 and have been added since last beta, I'm happy because my, 17 or iPhone 17 Pro Max, yay, is now supported as RAW. So that's good. I can now edit my my phone shots in Capture One. But also they have extended, this is me being selfish, they've extended the crop pass-through, so the crop information pass-through that was already built in for Fujifilm's GFX100RF, the rangefinder little version. That's now also been extended to a load of other cameras, including the X100 which is great. So that hopefully provides some extras and little toys. There's some changes to tethering. There's some enhanced lens support for the camera manufacturer profiles. As I say, some of the bugs have been fixed. Bugs around light fall off and bugs around DNGs with color casts coming through. But overall, you'll find that the bug fixes will become less and less as the betas go on. And I would argue that beta 4 is probably as close as you're likely to get to production before production. if I was putting money on it, which I'm not. Okay, so let's go into beta 4. Looks exactly the same as beta 3, right? Anyway, let's have a look at some edits. Before we go into that, let's just confirm for those of you that are struggling in how to send files with your changes and your edits in there. So let's take this raw file. This is one of Ian's. Let's see. So the reason is overblown is meant to be. Don't worry, we'll come back to that in a second. But let's say I've changed and added some color cast. Great, and I want to send this to me or someone else. Right click, export, and you go to export original files. And under the original files, you can say export as EIP, and it will automatically then put the tick mark saying include adjustments. That means that we get at the other end your raw file, but also all the adjustments, all the masks, all the layers, all the variants that you built around it, and we can see everything that you've done. There is a limitation, which is a problem, which is when you create an HDR, a DNG, or if you create a panoramic stitch, which is also a DNG, the adjustments that are done with that do not come through. You can't actually export it as an EIP, which is a little bit disappointing. There are ways around it, but it's a little bit messy, and I wouldn't recommend it. So for now, just bear in mind that if you do a blend or if you do a stitch, you're not necessarily going to be able to give me the information that I need to see what you've done with your edit, which is possibly where we're at with Ian's shot, but we'll come back to that anyway because that's a bit of a weird one. This is Ian's shot. I'm just going to move this DNG. This is the combined HDR version. These are the raws, so they're bracketed exposures, and this is the, let's call it that, the correct way of doing an HDR, which is you are going to bracket for a midtone, so a base exposure, which is basically, if you look at this histogram up here, histogram being all important to capture one. So actually, let's move this a bit smaller so we've got more picture. We like picture, don't we? Less than tools. So your base is designed to be pretty much the midpoint. Your shadows may be underexposed. Your highlights may be overexposed. But generally speaking, this is the best compromise between the two. Then you're going to have at least one, but normally, most people will do a 3 bracket exposure, sometimes 5. One thing to bear in mind, and don't ever forget this with nature. Nature moves. That sounds like an obvious statement, doesn't it? But the reality is nature is moving all the time. Wind, even things growing, things moving, like animals moving and whatever. If you are shooting an HDR image, the detail between each of the frames needs to be consistent. It needs to be in the same place, really. Otherwise, the HDR merging process, and it doesn't matter which software, some software can accommodate for it, but it's still not going to be perfectly right. When things move, it can't work out what to do with the blend because I've got a twig here and no twig here. So which one do I take? So just be aware, the more brackets you do, the longer your total time is going to be taken to create that blend of images. So rather than shooting for 3 seconds, let's say, to do 3 brackets, you might be shooting for 20 seconds to do 5 brackets. During those 20 seconds, my risk of things moving is exceptionally high compared to 1 or 2 seconds or maybe 3. So this one here is our overexposed image. Now it's interesting, we call this overexposed, but we actually call it a shadow image. The reason being because this is the image that we want to pull our shadows from. So it gets a bit backwards, back to front. This is our highlight image, which is actually underexposed. If we look at the histogram, we've got definite fall off of the left-hand wall up here, and we've got all of our highlights protected. If I go to exposure warning, I've got a little bit in there, so there is an argument. Ian could have gone a little bit darker still, but I believe this is recoverable, right? Likewise in the shadows, this is way overexposed, but I don't have anything that is too dark in the shadows. And the midtones, yes, we've got stuff that's overexposed, some stuff that's probably underexposed. One thing just to bear in mind, I'm going to sort of, they used to call it in corporate world, we're going to segue away from this for a second. Please don't use HDR unless you need to. And that sounds like an obvious statement, but just bear in mind that you're HDRing because you don't have enough dynamic range natively in the camera. Let's take this image, for example, here. I've got some exposure warning on the highlights. But as I've just shown you, I can get rid of those. I don't have anything that's underexposed here, actually, so I could actually pull up our shadows. And without HDR, as in true HDR, I've got a software version of HDR here, where basically we've squashed, we've brought up the shadows on this side here into being more visible, and we brought down the highlights into not being clipped, and we have effectively an HDR image, and that's done from the highlight image that Ian's already captured. So in other words, the underexposed image. It might be more difficult in the overexposed, so it might be that pulling down highlights doesn't quite get rid of it. And in fact, actually, we almost need to pull down shadow almost, and maybe pull down exposure, but we've lost a lot of the blue in the sky, you see? So this here, you can see there's color in the sky. This version of it doesn't have the range. So the reason for saying all of that, let's just reset all of these. If I can get away with getting the full range of an image within one exposure, I remove the risk of blending, I remove the risk of artifacts when it blends, I remove the risk of ghosts, I remove the risk of anything moving between two different frames, and it's likely to look more natural. At this point that you start having to use these sliders to their max, and let's do it. So, do you remember the years where we used to use the word cartoony? Well, there's our cartoony image. If you have to do that, arguably you'd be better off doing an actual blended exposure from real exposures. The software HDR tends to flatten the image a lot more than a blended image does natively. So use HDR if you need to. Don't if you don't. If you've got a camera with a huge dynamic range, try it first. If anything, aim for your base image to be an image that you use without HDR. That would be my rule. So this is our base image here. Could I get away with it without using the HDR tool? Possibly. But it's not the point of this. The point of this is to use the HDR tool. So let's go and do that. In here, Ian, you've got... this is the HDR blend that was sent through. I'm not sure this is using all of your brackets. The reason being, and if I just look at before or after, nothing's happened to this shot, because it doesn't transfer the adjustments. But if I look at this shot here and I look at the mid-tone shot or the base shot, nothing seems to change between the two of them. This one, our highlight shot, does, and this one, our shadow shot, does, but this and our mid-tone seem remarkably, spookily similar. So I'm not convinced this has actually done a proper HDR blend. So we're going to do it here live. First thing, so it depends on your decision, your finickiness on stuff. Personally, I like to make sure that I've ticked these boxes. It actually, to a certain extent, it doesn't matter because you can do it in the blended version. However, I am a weirdo and I like to make sure that I've done everything before I carry on. So I would be in a place of making sure that we've done our chromatic aberration. If you had any purple fringing, we don't have our tool, so right click on any of the toolbars, add in, I'm going to be off your screen for a second, the tool that says purple fringing, and we might add in a bit of that into there. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to make it consistent across all three base images. So we see our light fall off has happened on all of them. Right, we select the three, we right click, merge to HDR. Now these two things, it's been a while, right? We haven't talked about this a long time. Auto adjust and auto align. Generally speaking, auto align is if you are not on a tripod. So if you're on a tripod, you don't need auto align because in theory everything should be stable, right? There could be minor little movements between them, but if you're handheld, for sure you want to use auto align. If you're on a tripod, you don't need to. It's probably not going to do any harm, but you don't need that function. Auto adjust means that the output is going to be adjusted automatically to give you a nice, effectively middle grey exposure from whatever these three are. If you take this tick out and you compare it to with the tick in, you'll see the output slightly different, but it doesn't actually matter. This is giving you a starter for 10. That's all. Because it's a raw file, the DNG remains a raw. So even if you leave auto adjust in, you can always go back to the non-adjusted version by just undoing the sliders. So we choose our bracketed exposures, we right click, we choose merge to HDR. What Capture One is now doing is it's analyzing the best pixels effectively for the best tones for each pixel. And what it's doing is it's going through and it's saying, right, is in this pixel, is the shadow tone, has it got more detail in the shadow tone without noise? Yes, then let's use it from this exposure. Next one, right? Oh, that's a highlight, right? Do we have a darker version of this? Yes, use it from that. I'm simplifying it, but effectively that's what it does. And this is why I think, Ian, your version of this DNG didn't come across correctly, because that's the version that you sent across. This is out of the HDR tool straight away, and you can see now. So if you remember, I just said what worried me is this and this seemed very similar. Base exposure, middle exposure, and the HDR version seemed very, very similar. This is the base exposure. This is the HDR version we've just produced, and you can see they're very different. And the reason that they're very, very different is because this has now done that blending that we wanted it to. So it's taken the lightest parts of the shadows, it's taken the darkest parts of the highlights, blended it together, and you get what is effectively an HDR version. Now, remember I said that I left the tick in there to say auto adjust. This isn't just an HDR version, this is an HDR version that has been adjusted by Capture One. So if I were to undo these, they start to feel very similar. But the difference being, in the HDR version, with these sliders, there's more data to pull on than any of the individual frames. Because if you imagine, each pixel has now got the best data for its tone. So the shadows have got the data from the brighter exposure. So when we start pulling up shadows, we don't get noise, we get all the detail. The highlights have now got all the data from the darkest exposure. So when we pull down the highlights here, we don't get the flat overexposed grayness. We just get a nice blend, effectively, of highlights versus the midtones in there. Paula, I think the HDR version needs more work than the underexposed one, possibly, and this is what we're going to run through in a second. Ian, I think you mean the DNG. So the DNG was created did have the sliders automatically moved from neutral versions. So I think what's happened is when it was sent across, obviously we don't get the adjustments because it's a DNG. So that's all. So I think Ian would have seen the same as here. This is where you have to make a decision as to what the best outcome is for you. So here is our HDR version of the blend of the three images above. These ones here. So you can see my mouse. This, remember, was the midtone one. So I'm going to just flag this. Actually, I'm going to create a clone of that variant. Remove that flag, and I'm going to flag this one as well. So I've now got my HDR version, and I have my flat image version. Now remember, Capture One did all these changes already. So let's just try something really simple. Copying these adjustments onto our midtone. To copy, you're either going to go to your adjustments, or you can go Command-Shift-C, or you can do your copy and apply tool up here, your choice, but I'm going to do Command-Shift-C. Let's go to my mid-tone version, Command-Shift and V, or Control-Shift and V. So here is the HDR. Here is the mid-tone version. And this is where you see, while there are slight differences, and they are slight, these feel spookily similar, right? And the reason is because Ian's camera has got enough dynamic range that actually all of the adjustments for the pulling down highlights and lifting up shadows were perfectly capable on the original image. So what's different? Why would you do it? Or why would you do this? Number one, if the dynamic range was too great for the camera, then obviously that makes sense. But number two, this is the HDR version on the right. This is the original exposure. Just to prove a point, I'm going to pull up the exposure in the tree, and I'm going to pull up to the same amount, 1.84, the exposure in this one. This one, I don't know whether you'll be able to see it on YouTube, but there is less noise in this. This looks cleaner on my screen than this one. It's very subtle, don't get me wrong. It's pretty tough to see. Let's just go and get in a bit closer in there, so maybe you can see it there. Here we've got a load of noise and artifacts. Here we've got some smooth texture. In fact, one of the other ways of showing it is if I were to pull up some structure in here to 36 on this one, pretty high. This one we're going to go to 36 as well. You see the noise appearing in the left and less noise, or no noise actually in fairness, on the right. Why? The reason being that the shadows in the one on the right, the HDR merge, have been taken from a brighter exposure. There was no noise in those shadows. It was taken from this exposure. Whereas the one on the left, our mid-tone one, it's taken from literally that flat file, the mid-tone image. Same with the highlights. So my HDR version will allow me to rescue highlights cleaner than the one on the left. It's going to be very subtle in this case because we don't have a huge dynamic range on there. But it is allowing me to do that. And if I were to pull down, for example, exposure from 1.8 down to, where are we, 0.49. Again, you can see I've still got detail in these bits that are slightly overexposed. Here, not so much. And I say it's subtle. Bear in mind it is subtle. One of the dangers you have with HDR is look around here. This is the natural one. This is the HDR one. And you'll see you've got a sharper, effectively a sharper halo in there. And this is what we refer to when we talk about artifacts and risk of artifacts from blending images. So it doesn't mean it's wrong. Doesn't mean it's gone wrong. But what it does mean is that there is risk. When you start to blend images, if anything has moved even slightly or it's trying to blend a high contrast line, any of the software that stitches this stuff has the same risk that it blends something and it gets it slightly wrong. So which one feels more natural? I would say both of them are pretty similar, right? Not a lot of difference between them. Which one technically has cleaner shadows, cleaner highlights, less noise, less stuff that we don't like when we try and rescue an image? The HDR one, for sure. Which one is more natural? Probably the original. And if I was trying to do something that had some contrast in it and some, some depth to it and so on, I personally, I'm not convinced of the benefit of using HDR in this one, Ian. I think your camera is actually good enough to do it just out of the mid-tone. And if we take that mid-tone, so let's do that. These sliders, I would argue, are a little bit too much. I'd pull back white, pull back highlight. If you're worried, put your exposure warning on. I don't mind a little bit of overexposure here. That is literally where the sun is with the fog going through the trees. I would be in a place of adding a little bit of color balance in there. So our highlights are going to warm up. Overall, actually, we might warm it up a little bit as a scene. Maybe I get to there. I'm losing some blue, and that's a result of this color balance here. So maybe I need to go into my cyans, make them more blue, more saturated, and pull down some lightness. Same on here, blues, saturate them. Let's darken them down a little bit. Okay, I could do something very funky here, which is a new layer. We're going to have a gradient. So there's my mask. Don't want it to affect down here too much. And I'm going to intersect it with a Luma range, which we've always been able to do. We've talked about it before, but now it's a bit more formal. So I'm going to say I only want the brightest parts of this image. So I want a gradient. I want it to fall off. I'm combining the fact that it falls off before it gets to the ground. But I only want the brightest parts of this image to be affected by what I'm about to do. So let's hit apply with that. I may choose to refine it later, but let's have a little look. My highlights now on that part of the mask, I'm going to make more blue. I'm also going to pull down my exposure a little bit. And I've got my blue back in the sky. So we've now gone from there to there. Because we've got such a dark mass in the middle and it's effectively getting lighter to the outside, I am going to do the old school challenge of putting in a vignette around this shot, because I think that starts to add a little bit more direction into our subject, the subject being the tree. The tree trunk itself, even though it has pulled out the shadows, it's darker up here, it's darker down there. I'd like to lift that up a little bit. So let's go a new layer. AI brush. Let's just click in here, click around. Let's see our brush. If it's not getting stuff, use the marquee selection. You can always do that. It's pretty good there. Now, I might want to erase around the roots. There we go. Maybe this stuff here too. And, ooh, missed that bit now. It's annoying. If ever it's missing stuff, either zoom in or use the marquee tool to select exactly what you want. I'm not worried about that. I'm going to leave those branches out there in the mist. I'm going to refine mask. Just because we have the new tools doesn't mean we have to use them on everything. So I'm refining that mask. What that's done is it's made my mask very, very complex around the tree. And with that mask, the way I did the grayscale, by the way, is Option and M or Alt and M. So you press M for your mask, press M to get rid of your mask. If you hold down the Option key or Alt key and press M, you get a grayscale mask like that. If you forget the keyboard shortcut, go to your mask icon, and up here it will tell you. So we've got a tree now, but it's the darkest parts in here that we want to lift up. And there are two ways of doing it. Well, there's three in theory, but curves and levels are kind of interchangeable in this sense. We can use our black slider, and that will pull up everything that's the darkest stuff in this image, the bottom 5% of our histogram. Or I can use our curve slider, go to Luma, because I don't want to change the saturation. And I'm going to lock in all of this stuff up here. In fact, even lock down to there. I'm just going to lift the darkest parts of the histogram up. And we don't want to flatten it because you end up then with a flat tone in there. Now that's gone, weirdly, that's gone a little bit blue. Wouldn't we agree? So I wonder whether my blues in here have caused a problem, which means I can go back to my, let's call this a proper name. So double click on the layer name, you get the ability to rename it. Remember, you cannot rename the mask names at the moment. You can rename the layer that the masks sit within. But this in here, in my tree layer, the shadows are too blue. So I'm going to go down to my color balance in shadows. How do we get rid of blue? We go the opposite way. We go into maybe a slightly yellowy, orangey color. That sort of works. That's nice. You know, there's not a lot more I want to do with this. Image layer, we might want to add a touch of clarity. Be careful with clarity because it's going to punch, especially around all these high contrast areas. But that's doing it pretty nicely. Right, couple questions then that you guys have got. Roger, I noticed this last week as well. Is there a reason that you do not use the shift key to add a level graduated filter? Yes, because I was being really lazy, Roger, is the answer. So for those of you that don't know, it actually in reality is because in this one, I'm sort of following the line of light. So remember, light doesn't fall horizontally and vertically. It falls directionally, but from wherever the light is coming from. In this case here, my light in this image, it actually falls down lower down here and higher up here. So I kind of want to match that. Which means my graduated filter is slightly off at an angle. It is intentional, but equally, I am being also a little bit lazy. The way that you would do this, for those of you that don't know, if I hold down on the linear filter, you're going to click on here where you start and draw. If I just do it with the mouse, it's completely freeform. If I use my finger and hold down the shift key, it goes into 45-degree angles and they go down exactly straight. Turn it, you have to sort of push your mouse, you've got to push it across. 45 degrees, 90 degrees, yeah, and so on. So if you want it to be completely straight, yes, you can do that. You can also, don't forget, so I can do this freeform now without the mouse. Even if it's freeform, I can now still hold down the shift key and start changing it, and it will revert back to those 45-degree increments. So that's how you can do the square head-on filters or graduated masks. You don't have to. All I would encourage you to do is make sure your filter is lined up with the light, not with horizontal and vertical. But I hate this when I see this out people shooting. Unless you are shooting towards the exact horizon, there is a very high chance that the light, remember the filter is not about objects, it's about light. You're darkening or you're lightening on a graduated filter based on the position of that filter. If the light is not completely horizontal, why is your filter horizontal? Does not make sense. So if you're shooting towards the horizon and you're on a reverse ND or reverse GND, I understand that. That makes sense. But if you're, I see this a load. I've seen it with, out in fields and you've got this light falling in from the left-hand side because that's where the sun is and it's falling down nice and diagonally. Person sat there with their filter level. What on earth are you doing? So please, yes, use geometric filters when we need to, and I'm talking about when shooting more importantly, but also in your edit, yes, you can use them horizontal and vertical, but I'd much rather see someone follow the light with it than trying to follow a line that's arbitrary. There we go. Ian, they've now ruined the look of that tree by screwing planks of wood onto the base to stop people stepping inside. Oh, Instagrammers, they walk among us. Let's not be those people. But yeah, it's a shame when that happens, and unfortunately, it's happening more and more. Right. However, all that said, we've talked about DNG, we've talked about HDR, we've talked about when to merge, when not to merge. This was the image out of an HDR merge from the 3 original base images that Ian sent me. This is an image that's from a single shot that he sent that doesn't actually need an HDR merge, and I would say that's pretty nice. If you want to enhance this light coming through here, well, we can. Let's just have a think about how we do that. I'm going to create a radial mask. Radial mask as well. Remember, we can do things like hold down the Option key, and we can change one direction rather than all the directions that we're changing. So it goes from being symmetrical to asymmetrical. Oops, sorry. Let's go there. So that's pretty hard. I'm going to make sure it's a very, very soft gradient so we don't see it falling off. And I'm going to, let me see, let's combine it with a Luma range. And I'm going to say I want everything that's even slightly bright. So you can see the light rays coming in there. I don't want the things that are too bright. No, I do, unfortunately. So we'll go with that. There we go. There we go. So we're going to have a nice soft fall off so we get these rays. That's good, right? Hit apply. Now I want to refine this mask because I want it to spread a bit more. But in order to do that, I'm refining at the moment just the radial mask. The Luma range is still going to apply over the top of my radial mask. So if I want to refine this actual shape, I still need to rasterize it. So I'm going to go to rasterize mask. This is now no longer 2 masks. It's no longer a radial mask and a Luma range. It's now just one mask. Let's call it rays. Go to refine mask and look what we can now do. Now we get our rays. I can refine it again. There we go. Hit apply. I can get rid of the sky out of this as well if I want to now. Let's go like that. Because I don't really want the sky getting too bright. We just want the rays, right? So that's looking pretty good. And then I can refine it again. Hit apply. Nice. Now with those rays, we can do a couple things. Number one, we can warm them up. Pretty nice. Number two, we can add in some clarity. Number three, we could add in, if we want to, we'd actually add in some extra haze by going dehaze the other way and telling it I want the brightness. There we go. So my dehaze actually adds light rays in there. And I can change this to be, rather than white, to be maybe more on the yellow side. So maybe we take, there we go. So look at that. We go from there to there. By adding some clarity, mid-tone contrast, and then adding haze, so using the dehaze tool but in the opposite way, and you get a lovely way of getting some sun rays. So radial mask based on where the sun is, Luma range to select just the rays, rasterize it to get the shape of those rays, then take that shape, refine it. If you need to, refine it again. Then with that mask, we're going to warm it up. We're going to add some contrast through clarity. and we're going to add some haze through dehaze. There we go. Andreas is asking, would it make sense to make a comparison with the activated exposure warning? There's our exposure warning: on, off, on, off. The only bits that are overexposed in here are these little specular highlights in there. So these little red bits coming up here. Everything else, perfectly fine. I'd say that's not a bad edit, especially bearing in mind that's where we started from. I think, if we're playing HDR, you're in that mode of playing HDR. So if you're going to do it, let's make it pop. But just be careful that you haven't overdone it. I'd say this is probably on the limit. But regardless, can I do this with the HDR version, the DNG? Yes, I can. Do I need to? No, not really. I can do it from the base image. This is about knowing your camera. Okay, so hopefully that will make sense. Quite a lot in there, especially with the HDR tool. We haven't touched that for a little while, so it's good to go back into it. The problem, Ian, is we can't really send you that. Oh no, what am I talking about? Ha! Genius. If we'd done it on the DNG, I can't send you those edits. Because we've done it on a RAW, we can EIP that and send it. Added bonus. There we go. Right, Roger's shot of exploration overload. So this is a Keystone challenge that Roger's talking about. Basically, these are two versions of the same thing. I think you're frustrated that this apparently wasn't put in level. I don't know if it was. It's the sort of thing that really bugs me. And looking at this text down here versus that text, yes, it does look a little bit off. This is the corrected version here, and it still looks off. You asked the question, is this upright? Well, you can see the answer for yourself. So if I add a vertical guide, so either your guide's up here on the customized toolbar. By the way, the jelly icons that came with Tahoe are still here. You can see them in there. I'm not going to be able to get rid of them now, unfortunately. Shouldn't have done that, should I? But yeah, if you want to put up, let's try putting something up, see if it stops. No. Okay, that's a bit annoying, isn't it? It's going to be too annoying. Right, you're just going to have my head for a second. Let's all look at Tony's shot for a second. The beauty of Tony's shot. Well, I cancel that. Let's load up the beta again. I should put some hold music on, right? Right, we're now back in Capture One. So if ever that happens, you get the jelly icons in Tahoe. Just restart Capture One. I was about to say I thought it had actually fixed that in Beta 4, but apparently it hasn't. There we go. But you can add your guides up here. You can also go to the View menu, go to Customize Guides, and add a horizontal or vertical guide. Having added it, I can see here. Look at this wall. Even though it's been keystoned, this here is touching the wall. By the time it gets up here, it is not touching the wall. So even though it's keystoned, it's not correct. It's not been keystoned fully. This bench also, we can see here, is not keystoned fully. Now, one of the problems is this bench is actually off plane with this doorway. You can see that because the gap between the bench here is nothing. The gap between here has grown. So you've got so many different angles all competing in this shot that I'm not sure we're necessarily going to get to the correct keystone, but let's try. So let's go to our keystone tool, and I'm going to go to a four-way keystone. And the only thing I can really do with the four-way keystone is, normally we would really want to be as far out to the edge as possible, but I can't rely on the drain pipe being upright. I can't rely on stuff over here being upright. So instead, we're going to go for this part of the wall here, this edge of the wall here. And I'm going to go for the top of the E in the text and the top of the D in the text. So there, down to there. That feels level, right? A lot of this is feel. Someone asked me a couple of weeks ago, where's the right place to put this stuff on Keystone? How do you get to do it? It's just doing it again and again and again, and you get the idea of the feel. But what you're doing every time is you're placing the lines on the thing that you want to be straight, not the thing that is straight in the image, the thing that you want to be straight. We're going to have to imagine this line coming down here, and I'm going to pull this handle of the Keystone to this base part of the bench here, and I'm going to look up here at this whole line and imagine it going through. So I'm looking actually at the top of the white line and making sure that it stays on that wall. Let's get rid of the guides so we're not in the way. So I'm going to the top of the bench, the black line, and making sure that that white line has stayed on the wall edge all the way up. And here we're going to do exactly the same. So I'm going to look at this line of the wall, making sure it's on the top all the way up and to the top of this bench. Now if I hit apply, in theory, well actually not in theory, in practice, this is reality. This bench is now correct and horizontal. These walls are now correct and vertical. This text is now correct and vertical. These paving slabs are not. And the reason is, we talked about it, they're off at an angle to the rest. So this shop being corrected means the paving slabs are not. This is a really tough one. They weren't in here either. And I would say that this is a more correct Keystone correction than this one. This one's still off. This one is correct. If I were to pull my guide up now and look at this wall, it's spot on. This wall here is spot on. This bench here is spot on. This upper part of the bench here is correct. This part is correct. But our shop window down here is not. Our paving slabs down here are not. So in this case, this is one of those examples where you've just got to pick your battle. Which bit do you need to be level? And to go back to your point, Roger, if you need that text to be level for your own mental well-being, because it bugs me. But if you need that to be level, and part of it is because it's going off into an angle, then I would do it around the text and the window and forget everything else. The reason we can forget everything else is because it doesn't necessarily matter. So here's our before, and here's your edits. I'd be tempted to say this is a great candidate for a black and white conversion. So let's just enable black and white in there. We can play with it. So the blue jacket there, we can lighten up, so we can give our subject a bit more of a boost as a subject. We can actually pump in quite a bit more clarity as a result of it being black and white. It lets us get away with more contrast. Could try a little bit of dehaze. You've already got some vignetting on there. I'm tempted actually to say, rather than vignetting, use a linear mask. So we're going to create a new layer. I'm going to put a linear mask up to him here. I'm actually going to follow to the question earlier. Notice my linear mask is not using the shift key. I'm following the line of the paving. And here's a fun one. I'm going to add another linear gradient because I can. Isn't that exciting? And it's going to come from the top and it's going to stop by this wording here. And with these two linear gradients on the same layer, how exciting is that? With these two linear gradients, we can pull down our exposure just a little bit. We can actually pull down some contrast, so it's pulling less detail in as well. But to me, that's quite a nice little version of it then. I don't know whether it needs the color. And actually, by putting it into black and white, you almost lose some of that distraction of, well, the yellowing paved stones compared to the black bench, the blue top guy. Yeah, so is that the original? No. Let's go original, new variant. So there is our original. There is a neatened version of it. That's all. You've got a choice to make about this window in here. If you wanted to, again, remember we've got some fun choices now. So a new layer, and you could bear in mind you could have always done this, but I'm going to select all of the window contents. Just make sure it's been selected. Pretty much, just need that bit in there. And with that window content, I'm going to go to and intersect, because we want where both masks are correct, as in are true. So I want it for the AI mask itself, and I want it for everything that is not completely black, but is maybe sort of grayish, like that. It's nice soft fall off, bit of a radius to it. Great. So now I have a mask that looks like all the grey stuff in the window. Kind of funky, right? Remember, you could always do this. So you could draw a mask, Luma range. That's all we're doing. And with that mask, we can then say I want to pull my exposure of the grey stuff down. Just a bit. Contrast down so we don't see it so much. That'll lighten it a bit and then go to there. That to me, maybe that adds something, maybe it doesn't. That's going to be your interpretation. Maybe I'd back this away a little bit. But from there to there, this is a much more corrected version of it for what you can. You can't fix the street, but you can fix maybe the bits that are visually more compelling. Georg, your shot. You were talking about you were struggling with the white parts of the water or the bright parts of the water. I think actually the irony is this darkening of the bright areas has possibly done a bit too much. Now here's the fun one. This has been brought in pre beta 4. This is actually from standard Capture One, but what Capture One has done is it's split out the two masks because this was a Luma range. So what we had is it was Georg. Georg had done or created a mask already, and then applied a Luma range to it. Capture One in new version knows what to do with that because what that means is we've got two layers, two submasks. One is what was drawn, one is the Luma range, and this is how it will display. So if you pull in an older version which has got a Luma range applied, it brings it in quite nicely in a way that makes sense now for a new way of working. But I don't agree you need it. Because I don't think this needs to be darker. I think it needs to have more detail, which is a different thing. So if it were me, I'll just clone that variant. So we right click on it, clone variant, and that brings me a copy with all of the adjustments that Georg already made. If we are going to keep this layer, I would say rasterize it. And I would say refine it to soften it. I want more stuff on there. I don't want it to have this hard line fall off when it falls off. And instead of pulling down brightness, which also flattens it, I'm going to pull in some extra clarity and some extra structure and dehaze it, and then use my exposure alone just to pull it down a little bit, not a huge amount. And we go from there to there. To me, that's got so much more interest. And if I were to pull these two side by side, this one looks flat. This one looks interesting. It's got some texture to it, but also there's some contrast. This one we're losing the contrast. This water here, look at the orange line up here in the histogram. This water is sat in the sort of slightly upper mid-tones, but it's all very muddy and middly. Here, we're up here in the nice highlights. So I want to make sure I do have some contrast, especially with water that's moving. And I don't think you necessarily need it to be that much brighter. Now, what I would add in here, I'm going to change that to say water. In here would be grads. And this is quite a nice way of doing it now with the new world. So again, I could go straight up, but I don't want to affect it that way. Why? Because I want the line of darkness or darkening that I'm going to do to go from here to here. Well, that's not level. So again, another reason to not use the shift key if we don't have to. I'm going to go to there. So that's my first grad. Then I'm going to add another linear gradient and come in from here. Again, I'm just looking at the line and saying, I'm happy to lose a bit of that and a bit of that, but I want it to line along there. Great. So I've got my two grads. This one maybe can come in a bit more softer, basically. So less obvious. And with those two grads, we're just going to pull down our exposure. Now that brings me into the shot, right? In terms of the brightness of this, I think I'd be tempted to desaturate this slightly. I don't know if the greens have been saturated at all. No, it doesn't look like it, but I would be tempted on here just to, pull down saturation overall, just so it's not quite so nuclear. Maybe we take the green, pure green, and we say we pull down the lightness a little bit, we pull down the saturation a little bit, just to there. So it stops being quite so bang and a little more rumble. Overall, if we want to, we can pull up the brightness for the overall shot. But to me, that now feels like I'm stepping into a scene. Whereas here it feels very flat, very observer rather than involved. Observer, involved. I want layers. I want to see depth. I want to see darkness, and then I want to see where the light leads me to with my eyes, rather than trying to flatten everything to get all the detail out, which is great technically, but I lose some of the drama. That to me feels just a bit more involved. There we go. Right. So probably it for today. Yes, it is. Right. Let's just review quickly. So Georg's waterfall shot, far from this being too bright, I would say it's not bright enough. Trying to fix it, I think, has actually caused it to lose some presence. I would go down that road, to be honest, and give a bit more contrast into the shot and have some layers through, funnily enough, multiple gradients. It's quite nice. We can do that now. You could always do it on separate layers, but now you can do it consistently on the one. Roger's shot here, how you do the keystoning is up to you, but you're going to have to pick one, unfortunately. That's always going to be the case, and you're going to have to choose which thing is important to you to be level, and that's always going to be a challenge, especially in architecture where it's not always completely level. Ian's shot here, again, yes, use HDR if you need to. If your camera throws with dynamic range, then absolutely bracket the shots. Careful with your bracketing, limit the number that you need to the absolute amount that you can get away with. 3 stops difference is normally about right, and use HDR and use the HDR tool in Capture One to do it if you so choose. But if you can do it on a single shot, sometimes your results can be better. There we go. For those of you that, as I say, are free in November, come along. I'm here. You should come along to that. There's a link down there in the description. We're going to be taking a little bit of a break for a couple of weeks. All will be revealed later, but there'll be a different background and stuff behind me when we come back. But between now and then, you are free and welcome to access masterclasses, which are available if you click on the link down below. Pro tips, which are all available as well for free. Those ones on the playlist that you'll find on here. Please carry on. Next month's competition will go live in a couple of days' time. You too could win one of David's. You could win one of Tony's Brophies for that really nice shot, Eastern Yorkshire. Great. But between now and then, look after yourselves, and we'll see you soon. Cheers. Bye.